Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Eagle Eyed View. It's your boy Rich, and I'm joined by someone I've known for a very, very long time. Without going into the actual, yeah, we met in very interesting circumstances. This is my former tutor at college, and he was my English teacher. I flunked English language.
However, very well on either of us.
However, he did a massive part in getting me back on my feet, moving over to sports science, and I'm actually now a primary school teacher. So, Dan or Mr. Clayton, thank you so much for jumping on.
No, it's all your own work. Well done. You weren't that bad at English. You did quite well in it. You just dropped it after the first year, didn't you?
Yeah, I feel like I could have done better, to be fair.
Well, my memory's a good one anyway, so don't worry.
No, I appreciate that. But we're here to talk about Leeds United. So let's start about Leeds. Let's start with Leeds United back in the day. Now, my early memories of Leeds United are the likes of Tony Yeboah.
Yeah.
And then going on to like Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank.
Yeah.
So let's start with those two players in particular, and then we'll go into the year that I feel really defined you, which was the year you made the Champions League semi-final.
Yeah. I think you'll find. There's loads of older Leeds fans who'll say that Champions League run was like probably only the sort of second or third peak in the history of Leeds. They'll sort of point to the Don Revie years, sort of late 60s, early 70s in particular, and say that's the sort of pinnacle. But I started supporting Leeds in my sort of early 20s, really. So I kind of came to it a bit late, but it was more. That was the sort of period I think that really kind of grabbed me after I've been supporting for a while. Yeah, and some of those games were just amazing, and it was a fantastic time. But yeah, I mean, when you think about people like Hasselbank, I think he kind of, the way he left a bit of a sour taste for a lot of Leeds supporters. So he went off, I think, on loan to Atletico Madrid for a year, and then ended up at Chelsea. And Chelsea rivalry is still quite a big one, particularly. Well, maybe not as much now. Frank Lampard's gone, and that horrible kind of sour taste is gone. But he had success at Leeds, but I think the way he left was a bit awkward. And I think people have got much happier memories of Tony Yeboah simply because he just some wonder goals, and people still kind of people of a certain age still kind of bang the ball into the back of the net in the back garden and shout Yeboah. Yeah, and there's some great moments there. Yeah.
Now, as a fellow Ghanaian, it was great to see that someone of a Ghanaian heritage has such a prestige, like memory, like a moment, like as you say, whenever you smash the ball in off the crossbar, it's Yeboah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's legendary, isn't it? I mean, it's just some amazing strikes, and he was, I think, a really popular figure as well at Leeds. Yeah, and I think Leeds have had an interesting history, particularly with African footballers, because I think he made a big impact. Lucas Radebe from South Africa was just amazing, and he's still linked to the club in lots of ways, and he's seen as something of a hero. And then if you go back further, I'm rubbish with dates, but I think back in the 60s it was Albert Johansson, who was a South African player who came to play for Leeds. And I think he was a left winger, and his nickname kind of reflects the times of it. He was known as the Black Flash, I think. And it was kind of one of those. He made a massive impact, and I think was had one of those sort of players who I think people sort of remember really fondly, but had a pretty rough time of it. I think given the time and given sort of attitudes at the time. I think to a lot of African footballers. Yeah, but I think lots of happy memories for people like Yeboah, definitely. Yeah,
absolutely. Bringing it obviously a bit nearer to time regarding that Champions League semi-final run. David O'Leary was the manager at the time, if memory serves me right, and you had some amazing players like Ian Hart, Viduka, Harry Kewell. If memory, was it Batty and
Batty was definitely playing in midfield around that time. Yeah,
Yes.
Bowyer as well.
Oh yeah, that was it.
Yeah,
I think I immediately saw Newcastle straps. I was thinking, what's the player's name?
Yeah, fighting with Kieran Dyer. Yeah,
yeah,
but I mean, it was a brilliant team, and I mean, it was such. I mean, David O'Leary sort of called them his babies, and there were a lot of young players there, and a lot of them had come through the academy. So people like Jonathan Woodgate, who kind of, I don't think he ever really reached his potential, but he was fantastic when he was playing for Leeds.
yeah.
And yeah, like you say, Ian Hart. I mean, every time Ian Hart kind of lined up for a free kick, you were convinced it was going to be
Top
a goal.
corner. Yeah,
Amazing, and not a pacey left back by any stretch. You'd never, the idea of him playing for a Bielsa Leeds is just laughable. But he was such a great player from set pieces, and gave a sort of different dimension. And then I think Bowyer was an amazing player. He was a real sort of box to box kind of combative midfielder, and he scored some really good goals as well. So people like Don Matteo as well. And like you say, Viduka was. I mean, again, he was one of those kind of players who always sort of looked like he was kind of a bit big and ungainly, but he was an absolute unit, and he was just scored some fantastic goals.
His technical ability, was crazy.
Yeah,
absolutely great first touch. His finishing, second to none.
I mean, he just lashed him in sometimes, and he was just he was always in the right place, and even if he wasn't, he could create kind of space for himself. And I think he was a bit underrated at the time. I think when people look back at, particularly when you look back at the 4 goals he scored in that Liverpool game, when it's 4-3 at Elland Road against Liverpool. I mean, that was when VAR probably would have ruled out 1 or 2 of those these days. But you kind of forget all about that. But it was they just fantastic, and the sort of range of the range of play that he kind of offered as a sort of target man, but also a sort of creative player. He was fantastic. I mean, I've got again happy memories of watching lots of games with him playing. Yeah,
definitely. Was there any moment during that Champions League run where you thought we could actually win this?
I don't know. It kind of it felt a little bit like it was just a great run and a great experience. And I think every kind of game you played and every sort of leg you got through felt like, oh wow, this is great. And I never felt like this is going to be ours. Because I think each game was, you were up against, pretty tough opposition. And it felt like one of those kind of things where, you were just, I know I'm sure other people felt differently who were convinced, we could get there and win the final. But it did feel like, we were kind of pushing it each time, particularly for a team that young. And I think it felt like a great achievement to reach that semi-final. And I know you want to win every game and get through and win the final, but it did feel like that was a really impressive run. And if we'd had some more experienced heads, we might have, taken it further. But
you did come up against a very good Valencia side.
Well,
had a young Aymar, Guy Comendieta. That was some really, really good players at the time.
But a good run all the same. And you kind of, it felt like it was it felt like a kind of adventure as well, I think, partly because, you felt sort of invested in those young players who'd come through. I mean, you mentioned Kuhl as well. And again, the way Kuhl kind of left, and he's then, he's moved to Galatasaray, who, have got, there's clearly a really unpleasant sort of history between Leeds and them because of what happened with the murder of the 2 Leeds fans. And the subsequent behaviour of Galatasaray, it's stuff like that. It's more than just a football rivalry. And certainly when he went there, that was for a lot of people, Kuhl was, you just don't talk about him anymore. But it real shame because I mean, as a footballer, he was phenomenal and so skillful. I mean, I remember watching him and just kind of, it was absolute joy. But again, it's one of those, in retrospect, you kind of, it's more problematic. Yeah.
I mean, there was a game against Arsenal at Highbury where he scored, I believe, 2 unbelievable strikes.
I definitely remember one of them.
I definitely remember one. I think he might have got. Well,
I can't remember, but I definitely know he got one because I remember leaping off the sofa in our flat and my knuckles hit the ceiling and they left a blood stain across the ceiling, which was still there when we moved out to a new house. And I kind of look back at that thinking that was that moment. It was just amazing. Yeah.
Such an amazing strike. And I think that secured Manchester United the league as well.
Yeah. Which, yeah, was one of those kind of things where you kind of think, oh dear, well, we shouldn't have done that, but it was fun. Yeah.
On that note, just quickly, what do you think was the barrier to Leeds actually being real title contenders? Because I think there was one season where you challenged, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
You only went so far in the sense.
I think it was. I'm trying to remember if it was like second was our highest or if it was third. I mean, we certainly had a period around then where we were in the sort of top 4 or 5 and getting, I think 2 or 3 seasons was it. I'm terrible at remembering sort of figures and things like that, but certainly in the Champions League places, or kind of there and thereabouts, the UEFA Cup ones as well. But it kind of felt like there was possibly you needed a little bit more nous in there from a couple more experienced heads, and maybe I think there was a sense that O'Leary, while he had qualities, was not the kind of mastermind that would have taken us further. I think he was very willing to bring the young players through, but it often became more about him than it did them. And while he was, I think he was a very good manager at the time. There was there's a lot of Leeds fans I think who felt that it was, he could have managed some of those players better, and maybe, certainly around the time the Bowyer and Woodgate trial happened, he wrote a book and published a book called Leeds United on Trial, and it was just one of those kind of things you just think, why do that there? Why do it at all? But why do it then? And that's the sort of thing where it just creates stuff away from the football, and you just kind of think there's no need for it. But yeah, I mean, I think if we'd had maybe a bit more experience, I mean, I think if he'd sort of learned a bit more about what was going on, we might have had a more sort of sustained run. But I think at that time as well, you were up against it. There was some very strong teams in the Premier League
division.
Yeah,
absolutely. So you've had the highs of Champions League football, obviously in 2000-2001 season. Then you had the lows.
Yeah, well, I remember the lows more because it's been
2003-2004 season where even me as a Palace fan on the outside looking in was like, wait, Leeds are relegated.
Yeah. No, it was awful. And I mean, it was.
How was it for you as a fan?
It was just horrendous. I mean, you could see it happening that season, and you could see it all falling apart, and you could see the financial side of the club was just absolutely in ruins. And so all the stuff sort of started coming out about how we didn't even own some of the players. They were kind of, they were owned by like stuff that would be kind of illegal now, like third-party ownership and stuff. So we were kind of leasing people like Rio Ferdinand. And even though we paid I think 18 million for him from West Ham and got 30 million from, Manchester United.
Yeah.
The club didn't really see any of that money. And it was
just quickly on that, actually, because you obviously mentioned Harry Kewell going to Galatasaray. What was the feeling regarding Rio going to Manchester United?
Oh, well, it was bad because he'd been great for us. He'd had a really, really good sort of breakthrough season, I think, and he'd formed a really good partnership at the back. But then he went off to the World Cup, and he was kind of clearly being sort of tapped up for a move, and at the end of that season he'd gone. And I mean, it kind of made me a bit kind of anxious this summer with Calvin Phillips. When everyone sort of lauding him, praising him to the heavens, and kind of saying, this great lad, where's he been? It reminded me a bit of the Rio Ferdinand kind of stuff, where you just worry that someone who makes a big name for themselves on an international stage will sort of go off to a sort of bigger club. And it was seen really that there's always been that rivalry with Manchester United, but there was that sense that he was quite a popular player with us. He'd done a lot of he'd sort of invested himself in the whole kind of project, it seemed like. And then when he went, it was like, oh well, he's just kind of jumped ship. But I think the thing that kind of hurts as well is he was very good for Man U. and he became a really, really good centre back. And I think he's still one of the people I'd sort of rate most highly as one of our sort of ex players. Which hurts all the more when you see someone like that kind of succeeding at, you know, a big rival. Yeah, it's a shame. But I mean, you know, the as you said, the kind of the sort of lows from 2004. I mean, that they're more sort of current in my memory than any of the kind of highs in the past, because I suppose we'd sort of lived through them for so long. I was just sort of saying, you know, to you before we went on air that, you know, my daughter was born in 2004, and until last year, she hadn't seen Leeds in the Premier League. So she, you know, she goes to Leeds games with me quite a lot and is a devoted Leeds supporter. But we, you know, as me telling her, the old man telling a story saying, "Oh, Leeds were once a great team," and she's like seeing this team in 14th in the Championship, thinking he's talking nonsense. This isn't true. How can this be true? But you know, I think it's that sort of languishing in like the Championship and then failing to get back up through the playoffs. So there was that kind of chance against, I think, Watford, where they just, you know, hammered us. I remember watching that in a pub with a Sheffield Wednesday supporting mate, and it was awful.
Yeah,
I think 3-0 there at Cardiff, and just, you know, at the in the playoff final, and then down to League One in 2007, I think, and you know, bankruptcy, Ken Bates, awful man, awful owner, and you know, points deductions. So, you know, -10 and then -15. So starting the season with -15 points, and Dennis Wise as manager. So you kind of think, you know, I mean, amazingly for somebody who was so closely associated with Chelsea and Ken Bates, he did quite a decent job for a while with Leeds and got us, you know, I think by may even have been before Christmas, we were actually, you know, top of the league. Having started with, you know, -15 points. But again, it's one of those sort of things where you just, you know, those lows were awful. And then the sort of languishing in League One for 3 or 4 seasons. And then you've got the whole kind of, even the promotion, you know, against Bristol Rovers on that last day of the season, where it was kind of, you know, touch and go, and winning that 2-1 with 10 men and getting automatic promotion, you know, even with Max Gradle getting sent off, and sort of transfer talk of Jermaine Beckford going, even that game was kind of fraught. And I mean, it's an amazing experience to kind of to go up, but then you're in the Championship, you're still away from your sort of goal in the Premier League. And then there's those endless years in the Championship where you're kind of floating around the kind of playoff places and then fall away, and then you sort of end up in 14th, 15th. It's just, that was most of, you know, the last 10 years was that kind of mediocrity. And just, you know, thinking, gradually worrying as well that you're going to, you know, the younger generation of Leeds supporters are just not going to exist. They're not going to want to watch a load of kind of cloggers like Luke Varney and Michael Brown and Michael Tong and Neil Warnock, Steve Evans. You don't want to see them. All of it, you know, you've got young kids who'll be supporting Man City and Liverpool and, you know, Premier League outfits like, you know, Palace. No, not really.
behave. Just to bring a bit of context for our viewers, why did Leeds United get the 10 and the 15 points deductions?
I think it went into administration, so I think there was an automatic points deduction for that. And then I think the -15 happened because I think my understanding of it was something to do with Ken Bates and the ownership of the club, was that they hadn't provided the right kind of documentation for going into administration. So there was some kind of legal thing around that. And it was about the club finances. And I mean, you know, with Ken Bates, it was notoriously murky stuff. I mean, he was claiming that the club was owned by somebody else who just happened to be, you know, somebody who wanted him to run it. And nobody ever really got to the bottom of who it was, apart from maybe that it was a man who looked a little bit like Ken Bates in a tax haven. But nobody ever knew. And I think it's one of those kind of things where there was lots of suspicions, and I'm sure the truth will come out one day. But it was, you know, it was not a good time to be a Leeds supporter, particularly given that he, with his Chelsea history and the fact that he'd described to Leeds as a team that he hated and who he wanted to kind of not exist anymore. And even when he was the owner of Leeds, he talked about Leeds fans as being vile animals. So it wasn't a match made in heaven.
Unbelievable. Now, Leeds have got rivalries.
Mm.
The two that spring to mind are Millwall. But I'm going to start off with Manchester United first, because I think the Millwall one might be a bit meatier.
It's I mean the Manchester United one. I think there's a long sort of historical rivalry in terms of sort of Lancashire v Yorkshire. So kind of War of the Roses stuff, red rose, white rose, that kind of thing. So going back for centuries. And then I think you've kind of got they're not geographic. I mean, I'm a Londoner, so I've not got my kind of roots in Yorkshire. Got a lot of friends and family up that way. But I think if you sort of know that part of the world, it's they may look like they're miles apart, but they're quite they're relatively close, I suppose. And I think you've got lots of teams in that part of the sort of north of England where there is a kind of there is a sort of rivalry based on proximity. So Liverpool and Man U are pretty close, really. You're just over the Pennines between Leeds and Manchester. And I think there's that, and there's also the fact that for a long time, particularly sort of end of the '60s, early '70s, Leeds were one of the biggest teams in world football, really, hugely successful, and Manchester United have also had a long and storied period of success as well. So I mean, I think there is always that kind of rivalry there, and when you're sort of competing at the top against a sort of another team you kind of had a long rivalry with, it's bound to sort of continue. And I think it's about sort of particular games. There's been there's been particular matches where there's the rivalry sort of come to a head. There's often that sort of being pipped at the post by them. I think for a while as well, Leeds were kind of perennial sort of runners up. And there have been some great moments as well. I mean, not last season, because I think they gave us an absolute tonking when we played them at Old Trafford, which is really quite the worst game of the season last season.
There is one game that comes to mind: FA Cup, Old Trafford, Jermaine Beckford.
Yeah, brilliant game. And again, that's one of the ones where I damaged something in the house. That was just an absolutely amazing game, and it was we were League One as well. And to see Alex Ferguson's face and his absolute rage about that game, he wouldn't let the Man U players shake hands and swap shirts with the Leeds players at the end. He was so incensed, and it was great to see that it meant something to him as well. And it's probably an unpopular opinion for a Leeds fan to have, but I've always had a grudging respect for Alex Ferguson because I think in many ways I think sort of outside football and some of his kind of values, I think he's a good bloke in many ways. But I think it's as a manager for Man U, you always like to see somebody who's so kind of linked to them suffer. And I think it was great to see how agitated he was, and it may seem a bit sort of tin pot to celebrate that as a kind of 1-0 victory, but it was, I suppose, when you've fallen that far out of competing with them as a real kind of rival for so long, those things matter. And I think it's now great that we're back in the Premier League and we can actually compete with them on a more equal footing as well.
Sure.
And certainly we did better against them in the second game of the season at Elland Road. I mean, that was a 0-0, and obviously we'd learned our lesson from the first one. But it'd be interesting to see what happens this season, and it's going to be early on, isn't it? Because we're playing them at Old Trafford on the first game of the season. So that could be, I'm looking forward to that, but probably not as well.
The other club,
I mean, it's a less kind of, I suppose there's a footballing rivalry that goes probably back to the 70s, and probably kind of related to sort of a degree of kind of aggro at the grounds, and the sort of following that Millwall had and have, and I suppose Leeds had that and have it still to some extent, and that there's the old kind of firms and everything from then in the 80s. So I think there's something there, and there's also maybe the kind of industrial north versus the kind of the one of the teams that was kind of associated with kind of working class dock workers in London, and maybe that kind of sense of a kind of deep-seated rivalry there between South and North. But I think as well, I mean, more recently it's been, there certainly Millwall supports some Millwall supporters. I mean, you don't want to kind of tar everyone with the same brush, do you?
Yeah.
But they've certainly they've aggravated Leeds fans by kind of waving Turkish flags and things like that, and doing kind of knife gestures because of the murder of the 2 Leeds fans in Turkey, Galatasaray.
Yeah. If memory serves me right as well, was Elhaj Diouf part of your squad?
He was.
Was that during because I believe there was racial allegations. I just wasn't sure whether it was it was at him, but I don't know if it was for him playing for Leeds.
I'm not sure. I can't remember that in specifically.
Okay.
I mean, I know he did play for Leeds, and he got into trouble for doing doing some sort of gesture towards Brighton fans, and
he got into trouble for a load of stuff. To be fair,
he was crazy. Yeah. He used to drive around in his like a gold-plated Hummer or something like that. Yeah. It was some kind of crazy vehicle.
And I think he spat. Was it towards Gerrard? I think it.
Yeah, there were definitely incidents like that. He was a bit of a loose cannon, wasn't he?
He was a very loose
I can't remember anything specifically about Millwall, but I mean, I might be, I might just be wrong.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. But you're a Premiership club.
And Millwall aren't, so that's good.
And Millwall aren't. But talk me through that, your thoughts and the feeling of finally getting promoted, because in that the season before you got promoted, you were running away with it at one stage, and then something went wrong, and then there was SpyGate. But so let's talk about SpyGate first. We'll talk about Derby County a bit into that, because obviously they then mocked you during, I believe they beat you in the game, and one of the celebrations was a bit mad.
Yeah. I'd stopped watching by that point. I think I'd just turned the TV off in disgust. So I didn't see those celebrations, and I've not gone back to watch that game.
Yeah, let's talk SpyGate.
Yeah. I think it was kind of overplayed to an extent, because I honestly think, Bielsa is a man of honor. He's a great man. I mean, with Bielsa worshippers in this house. And I just think it's something that lots of people do. They get as much information as they possibly can about another team. Yeah. And it may have been a bit kind of clumsy sending someone out, to go and have a look through the fence. But the whole thing that they were saying about wire cutters and like sneaking in and like hiding the bushes, it wasn't really the case. And I think it was a bit overplayed. And I do think there was an element of it as well from sort of xenophobic English media, kind of saying, "Oh, who's this foreign coach? He doesn't understand our English values of fair play," as if English players don't cheat and English managers aren't kind of taking bungs and all the rest of it. And it's just trying to apply a set of standards which just aren't consistent. And I think he was really honest. I mean, there was the whole thing around SpyGate. I mean, the bit I remember most was the kind of feeling on that day that he held that press conference, where people saying he's doing an emergency press conference. And I just thought, oh, he's going to leave. He's going to quit, because he has got a history of quitting clubs when he feels personally, slighted. And I remember, I mean, this might sound ridiculous for a man of my age, but I was so upset. I honestly thought if he leaves, I'm just going to burst into tears, because I just thought we've got so much love this man. He's kind of changed the whole club. He's obviously working really hard to make that change and get us competing at the top of the Championship and get us promoted. And I thought he's going to leave, and I had to take the dogs out, because I couldn't sit at home kind of flicking through Twitter all the time, because other people sort of working themselves into a frenzy about it, and I thought, no, I'm going to sit here and just be a nervous wreck. So I took the dogs out and I tried to kind of take my mind off it. And I came back, and there's a press conference, and it was all set up, and he'd done his PowerPoint. And once he started it, I kind of thought, he's not going to leave. This is amazing. And he was going through his whole thing, and it was just so brilliantly laid out. He had like little folders for all of the players he was interested in. That was where Dan James' folder appeared on his desktop, and everyone knew that he was interested in Dan James from Man U, from Swansea. And he you know, he had all the little clips, and then he went through and said, name me a game, and name me, and you know, someone shouted out a game, and he played the video from that game, and he looked at the kind of figures from it, and he said, this is the information we have. And then he kind of rather sort of, you know, self-effacingly kind of said, well, you know, why would I need to spy when I have all this information? Well, because I need more. I always need more. And so he fessed up to it. I mean, he said straight away, you know, yes, we did this. I've been doing it on all the games this season. And we'd be looking at all of those training sessions. And it was just so refreshing to hear somebody say, yep, this is what we do. You know, so, you know, take it from there. And he paid the fine himself. I thought it was a ridiculous fine. When you £250,000 for that, it wasn't even a breach of an existing rule. Yet, you know, you get clubs fined for racial chanting, you know, about 7,000 or 8,000 quid or something ridiculous. And you kind of think, well, look at the magnitude of stuff like that. And, you know, it was one of those kind of things where it obviously created a lot of interest for, you know, the media. And I know Sky were all over it. I mean, their kind of coverage of it was embarrassing. And then we had the game against Derby, of course, which, you know, we absolutely played them off the park. And that was fantastic. And that was when Frank Lampard, of course, was there. So that was an even nicer kind of feeling.
Yeah.
But then, you know, later that season, the sort of tables were turned. And that was just a horrible moment where you got through to that, you know, semi-final. We were 1-0 up from the first leg. We went ahead. And I remember turning to my daughter and sort of this was after a few cans as well, and saying, I'm going to book a hotel nearby. I'm going to get the tickets. And she just turned to me and said, don't say that. And of course, you know, minutes later, Kiko Casilla had come out and committed an absolute kind of goalkeeping atrocity. And, you know, we lost that one, and they were dancing around doing their little binoculars.
Oh,
you know,
man.
It was too much. It was a terrible, terrible moment, that end of that game.
It must have been horrible for you guys because Twitter blew up. You obviously had their celebrations like that. And then what made it even worse? Frank Lampard leading the singing in the changing room. I believe it was Stop Crying Your Eyes Out.
Yeah, that's it. Stop crying, Frank Lampard. Yeah, I know. With the trouble is with chants like that, they come and bite you on the arse, don't they? And it was, you know, it was being chanted all the way through because, you know, looked like we were going to do it. And it was just, you know, it's one of those. It was a totally Leeds moment. There's been so many moments like that in the history of Leeds where you just kind of so close to doing it and then screw it up at the last moment. And it's there's a guy, and I know he's written a lot about Leeds, Anthony Clavane, who's used to write for the Sunday Mirror. He's written a couple of really good books about Leeds United, including The Promised Land. He kind of describes it as the Leeds choke. That sort of the choke at the last moment where you kind of just don't quite make it. And that, for me, was just another sort of more modern iteration of that, really. But, you know, within a season or so, it feels a bit tin pot to be talking about Derby County because they're absolutely in turmoil. I mean, this morning there was stories about them being handed contracts, but with their names on, but no wages actually filled in. So they were all kind of, you know, and Wayne Rooney injuring one of his own players when he's only got about 5 for his entire squad. So, you know,
and the other issues with Wayne Rooney, but we won't get into that.
You know, and Frank Lampard had gone anyway, so he'd gone off to Chelsea to take his kind of, you know, his rightful place with his the club he always felt he should have been manager of, and, you know, didn't do a particularly great job with them. So it felt like the sort of, it's not a real great rivalry with Derby County. I know there's a sort of Brian Clough stuff from back in the 70s, and again, you know, they were a big club in the 70s, and I suppose 80s as well. But you kind of, you know, it's not a huge rivalry, but there was certainly that feeling around the time that Derby were a bit of a, you know, they really got one over on us on that season, and it was that really hurt. I mean, that was devastating. I still can't watch that game. It still hurts, even having, you know, managed to go through the season as, you know, champions and win it by 10 clear points the next season.
Yeah, and this is it. You're a Premier League side as well. A lot of it was made, obviously, coming into the Premiership about Bielsa ball. And once again, I guess you could kind of call it English, and it's more so the media, like ignorance in a sense.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's not going to work in the Prem.
Yeah.
Leeds last season?
I know. It was really
unreal.
Yeah.
Unreal. Did you think it was going to work in the Prem? What was your thoughts on Bielsa ball?
Yeah, I thought it would, because I think we'd looked so good for 2 seasons under him, and at our best. I mean, I remember the first game watching. I think it was Stoke City. Back in the Championship when Bielsa took over. Yeah, Stoke City, and I think we played Derby as well soon after, and the change, in those players, and it was largely the same group of players, who'd been, what appeared to be sort of mid-table cloggers, and occasionally kind of people you thought, Luke Ayling, I don't think anyone really thought he would be Premier League quality.
Yeah.
You kind of looked at them and thought, that's just amazing. What are they doing? And then someone like Matthias Klick, you saw Calvin Phillips absolutely transformed. They were just amazing then, and at their best in the Championship. And they're at their best for a lot of those 2 seasons. I genuinely thought, and I think a lot of Leeds supporters thought, we could compete with most teams in the Premier League if we play like this.
Yeah.
And he improved the squad. He brought in a couple of new people. You got Bamford, who was absolutely on fire, in the Premier League. You had people like Jack Harrison, who's improved year on year. Rafinha bought in, and he's been a revelation. He's a brilliant player.
Such a good player.
You look at people like Liam Cooper and Stuart Dallas as well, and Luke Ayling, I mentioned, who were kind of, I never really rated Stuart Dallas. I just wondered what he was for. Was he a winger? Was he kind of just a bit of a journeyman? But he's, people like him have stepped up so many levels and have just been amazing. And they play so well as a kind of unit. And yeah, I mean, I wasn't hugely surprised, but I was really, really delighted to see how we kind of took it to teams. I mean, that Liverpool game was just, I felt a bit like Klopp at the end, where he was just like going, wow. And even though we lost it 4-3, and it's, it felt like we really should have at least got a point out of that. It was, and then, Man City a couple of weeks later on, I mean, that was one of those games where you kind of thought for 20 minutes they absolutely were pelting us, and I just thought, this is, we're gonna completely buckle here. But then took it back to them and drew that one, and it was that was a really good performance. Then beat Villa 3-0 with that Bamford hat trick. Played some, were great against some other teams, and I mean we had had a fair share of losses. I mean, lost against Palace obviously, which was that was a weird game.
Very.
I think Palace played well that game, but I don't think.
Yeah, it was one of our better games, to be honest.
Yeah.
But then you look at the Bamford goal that got disallowed, which I don't think was offside, which would have made it 1-1.
Yeah.
The goalkeeping howler.
There was like a Costa own goal, which was an absolute freak, wasn't it? Sort of
there was a cross, deflected cross.
Yeah.
Which then hit the back post and went in. So it was a very weird game.
Yeah.
But we weren't complaining.
No, I know. And another mate who's a Crystal Palace supporter was like, this is amazing. On cloud 9, winning 4-1 against Leeds.
Yeah.
And I think we lost against Leicester either the game before or after as well, 4-1. And it felt like that was kind of, there was some pretty tough defeats in there. And then there's the Scum game 6-2, and that was bad. But then, I think as well, he kind of, I think he adapted a little bit as well. I think there were changes. It's not. There was a lot of kind of quite lazy commentary about Bielsa ball, and it was all saying, it's all out attack. He doesn't care about defence. That was never the case. It is a very fast transitional kind of game that he plays, and there are kind of moves that he's quite keen to instill in players. There's a lot of very quick passing, quick breaks. But there is a sense that he's got a defensive ethos as well, and maybe that was sort of just pushed to the fore a little bit in the second half of the season.
I mean, I don't care what people say, but I thoroughly enjoyed watching Leeds play, and I think it was more so because they had a way of playing, and they stuck to it. They didn't care what anyone thought, what anyone was saying, and it was highly entertaining. You score 3, we're going to try and score 4.
Yeah.
It made for some really exciting Premier League games. And Bielsa needs his flowers because he had a method, he stuck with it. And I believe as the season went on, he gained his respect.
Yeah.
Yes, there could be games where he could have managed it a bit better, but he did what he did, and I've got to commend him for that, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well. He, you're right. He sticks to his guns, and he's always kind of. I think he's been sort of quoted as saying, our plan B is just do plan A better. But I think he's kind of, there are a few kind of things where you look and think, oh, could he have just brought on a different sub at that point? Could he have done X, Y, Z? And in the end, I think a lot of Leeds supporters basically just say, look, in Bielsa we trust. Whatever he does, he knows more about his game than any of us do. He knows these players. He's got so much out of these players that he's operating on such a huge amount of, trust and credit with Leeds supporters. I mean, there were times in, the Championship where we had a bit of a rough patch, and there were a couple of people who started saying, oh, we need to get rid of him. We need to bring in someone who knows English football, like Mick McCarthy. You just thought, honestly, please, come on.
Of all gaffers,
nobody seriously suggesting that. There was maybe a handful of people who would, the kind of people who love Neil Warnock and Steve Evans, and they love a good, solid, English manager like Sam Allardyce. But the massive majority of Leeds supporters, just have total respect for Bielsa and what he's done. And his coaching staff and Victor Orta as well. He brings in the players. I think there's a lot of people who really, understand, where he fits in and respect, what he's doing in the transfer market and the sort of value that he's getting from some of our signings. Yeah,
absolutely. And all in all, what's your overall views of your season last season? Did you come into it just hoping to not go straight back down? Because obviously after a 16-year exodus, or was you thinking, let's push for Europe? Like, what was your viewpoints of where you may finish?
I think a lot of people probably thought safety first would just be great, but when it was clear that we were playing the kind of football that could get us results against some of the top teams, I think a lot of people just felt, well, let's just see where it goes. I felt a little bit like with last season in the Premier League, like I did in the Champions League season. With that run, it was like, well, look, we're doing really well here. Let's just see where it takes us. And I kind of didn't really put. I kind of think in some sort of early season prediction, I think I put us down between 8th and 10th in a sort of moment of kind of slight madness. Because we'd done so well against, Liverpool and Man City and Villa. And then we had that run of games, like we're talking about the Palace, Leicester ones and the Man U one. And I thought, I've been a bit optimistic there. But at no point, did I feel we were in any danger. I think we were, when you look at the sort of points total, we were safe by January in the end.
Yeah.
I think it was against the Newcastle game where, we got enough points to stay up. And after that, it felt like, this is great. Let's just enjoy this and savor it as well. I think there's a lot of people, particularly people like on the Square Ball podcast and people like that, are saying, things like we really need to just enjoy this moment because for Leeds fans, this has been such a long time coming. Some of us might, younger ones will not have experienced it. And I kind of think, thinking like my daughter and things like that, she won't have seen anything like it. And I know she loved last season. The way we played was just sort of fearless.
Yeah,
we just loved watching it. So yeah, I mean, it felt like a brilliant season. And yeah, I think all Leeds fans to some extent are going to have a degree of are likely to be a bit pessimistic given our history. But I think I don't think anyone's really thinking we're going to do a Sheffield United and go struggle next season.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it'd be great to see us sort of, it would be great to see us push on. But I think if we, similar kind of position in the league, I'd be quite happy with. I'd love to see us compete for Europe because I'd love to see Bielsa in Europe. I think it would be brilliant to see us against some of those, the big European teams again, like in the 70s, in the Champions League run, and to really, take it to them. But having said that, we played Ajax last night in a friendly and lost 4-0. So I'd say some sort of optimism. Yeah.
This is it. Let's quickly I'm going to talk England just very briefly because obviously normally with the England squads, the players are formed from the top 4, maybe the top 6. However, there was one player who did make it, and one player I felt was unlucky not to.
Yeah.
Calvin Phillips had a very, very good season all round. Euros was brilliant as well. Bamford, for me, personally, should have been in the squad.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
He may not have seen many minutes, but he's another one that had a great season. So, as a Leeds fan, how do you feel about, like, obviously the fact that players from your club are playing international football?
Yeah, I mean, it's great, particularly because it's Calvin Phillips, and I think he's just, he's loved by the Leeds fan base, and he's just such a, he's such a great bloke, and you kind of, he's such a great player, but also I think when you see him interviewed and you read about, him and his kind of life, I just think he's a very eloquent spokesman for a lot of footballers, and I just think he's, very down to earth. I mean, this time next year he may have left Leeds and gone to Man City or something like that, and might have a different opinion. But I don't. I think even if that happens, it's one of those. He's got that kind of root. He's got the sort of roots in the club and the area, and he's got that kind of story as well, which I think a lot of people who support Leeds can relate to. So it's brilliant seeing him come through. I mean, we'd known for a couple of seasons how great he was. But I think even Leeds fans were surprised to see how good he became, because he there was a time where a lot of Leeds supporters wouldn't really have cared if he'd gone. Just before Bielsa came in, I think we didn't really see him as like even like a good championship player. But the transformation with him has just been amazing, and I think he's been, we've seen how brilliant he is for 2 seasons, and then his season in the Premier League. So it's no great surprise to see how good he was for England. And I think he was exceptional. I mean, remember the first game against Croatia, I was cheering more for the assist than I was for the goal. And it was just, that was such a great ball through to Sterling. And it just felt like, here's this is for Leeds, this is brilliant. But you're right about Bamford. I mean, I think he was really unlucky. You're probably right in saying he probably wouldn't have got many minutes, because when you look at, he persisted with Kane, and I think in the end probably that was the right decision, wasn't it? Given how he picked up as the tournament went on. But Calvert-Lewin did he come on at all? I don't think he appeared, did he?
Yeah, maybe 5 minutes here or there.
And Rashford was kind of used occasionally. It didn't feel like anyone was really going to knock Harry Kane off that sort of top spot. And I kind of think as well, it's maybe, I think it would have been good to include Bamford in the squad, but I wonder if Southgate kind of saw him as good within the Leeds system, but not necessarily the kind of player he wanted to bring off the bench to change a game. But then he didn't really have many of those either, did he? I mean, certainly not as strikers. I mean, there's always Grealish, and you could argue that he was that kind of player. But yeah, I mean, it's a shame for Bamford, because I think he did so well last season. I think he surprised a lot of Leeds supporters by being so clinical. But again, very likable bloke, and I think it's been a really interesting person to listen to. He's had a kind of big role in sort of talking to the wider fan base through the Leeds United podcast as well, and he's comes across as a really kind of nice, thoughtful, down to earth guy. So it's with him and Calvin, you kind of feel like it would have been good if the both of them had gone. I think it was also there's also a case for Jack Harrison being called up, maybe slightly more left field, and probably harder for him to break through. And also it'd been brilliant to see Luke Ayling, because I think while he's going to struggle against while you've got people like Kyle Walker and Kieran Trippier around, Luke Ayling would be a fantastic player to bring in, particularly with his kind of story of sort of lower league, and gradually moving up to sort of Leeds in the Premier League. But yeah, really good to see Leeds players playing for England again.
Unfortunately for Ayling, there's not only is there Walker and Trippier, there's also Reece James and Aaron Wan-Bissaka.
No, you're right.
It's a very, very big list of right backs.
And I do think there is an argument as well, like with the Bamford thing, that they play very well within this system, but would they work with other players in the same sort of way? And I do wonder sometimes.
Well, I guess that's what the international friendlies are for, and I don't think as a nation, we utilize that well. Those are the times to try and see if those players can work within the system.
Yeah.
And give them like 90 minutes. Don't give them, oh, here's your first cap, here's 30.
Yeah.
What am I going to do in 30 minutes?
Pointless, isn't it? Yeah.
You know, absolutely. All right. Before we finish, I'm going to put you on the spot. Where will Leeds finish next season?
Well, I think I'd be happy with about the same sort of area. So kind of mid-table, higher end of mid-table. So we finished 9th last season. If we can finish somewhere there or thereabouts, I'd see that as a successful season. Ideally, though, I'd like to see us, finish within a kind of a shout of European places. I think it's going to be trickier in the second season. And I think as well, when you kind of look at where we've got weaknesses, I don't think they've been kind of fully addressed. We brought in a new left back, so Junior Firpo from Barcelona, who didn't have a great time at Barcelona. So he was at Real Betis, I think, before he was signed as like a kind of young, breakthrough player. Then he did really well for them, but I think he had a bit of a nightmare first game for Barcelona, and he's been. He's just not really had a look in there when you think about who's ahead of him. So I think he looks good, and he didn't play last night in the Ajax game because I think he had a bit of a knock, but he's looked really good in the pre-seasons, and I think that was one place one position we needed to fill. But I think when Calvin Phillips doesn't play, we're stuck. We have to adapt to that, and I don't think we've got a replacement for him or a sort of understudy.
Right.
Adam Forshaw's been injured for the best part of 2 years, and he would be the person to step in. So he's coming back in. I just don't think he'll be ready, to do that job particularly. So I think there are weaknesses, and I do think sometimes people can get to us through the centre of midfield. They can run at us. One of the goals last night was from a central defender who basically just ran through the middle and got a lucky bounce. But it's that kind of softness in the middle. And while I think we can be great attacking, and I think we make great use of the wings and fast sort of counter-attacking, I think we are vulnerable through the middle, and I think we haven't really addressed that. I'd like to see us get somebody in who could sort of toughen up the midfield. Maybe, if we could bring David Batty or Olivier Dacour out of retirement, that would be ideal.
Oh, Olivier Dacour.
He was brilliant. I used to love that man. He's so kind of wiry but hard, He just, great ball player, but also tough as nails.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But, similar sort of finish to, as long as we don't end up scrapping for relegation places, I think we'll get a sense after the first 4 or 5 games, won't we? But it's a tough start. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to come off the stream, get you to, I believe you've got a language podcast, so you can give that a quick promote. And I'll come back in and we'll close.
All right. Yeah, that's just the Lexis podcast you can find on most good podcast players. That's it. Thanks very much.
He's always been humble and modest. He has. Yeah, go give that a check. And no, it's going to be a very, very exciting season, I think, for Leeds. They surprised everyone last season, so I reckon they're going to be on everyone's radar this year.
Yeah. I do worry a bit. That's kind of, people think they'll be looking out for us knowing a bit more what to expect. So we'll just have to kind of, outplay them again. I wonder what will happen with Palace. I mean, what do you think this season?
It's going to be a very tough season for us. We've lost a lot of experienced players, but we've brought in some really good youth. Our signings have been really good. But I'm very excited. I am excited. It's just, we just need to get through this year.
Yeah.
And then I think the following season, I'm going to be like, yes, come on now. We can actually try and push further up the table and stuff. So there's excitement, but there's managing expectations as well, because it could go to pot.
It could, yeah. And I mean, Vieira, he's not got a huge amount of experience as a manager, has he? I think he's an interesting decision to appoint him. I think he could be great. Yeah.
I'm glad we haven't gone for the safe option and such. That's what I'm happy about. I think we'll be fine, though. I do think we'll be fine.
Yeah.
And so there are worse teams. Well, I'll put worse because no one's got the God-given right to stay in the division.
No.
But there are teams that we should finish above.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way to look at it, isn't it? And I think we kind of felt that a bit like last season with Leeds. It's like, we'll look at, there'll be Fulham will be beneath us, definitely. At one point, it looked like Newcastle would be as well. I think they might be the team to watch this season for going down, definitely.
Them and Southampton.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I like Hasenhüttl, and I think he's, some good players there, but I think they could easily go into a nosedive.
Yeah, because they've lost Bertrand and Ings.
Well, that was a bit of a bombshell, the Ings one, wasn't it? That just came out of nowhere.
Just came out of nowhere. But
yeah.
Fair play to Villa. That's how you do business.
Yeah.
Everyone's meant to know your business.
Yeah.
No,
it'd be interesting. Yeah.
It will be. It's going to be a very interesting season. Dan, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about Leeds.
Rich. I hope that's been useful.
No, it's been brilliant. It's been absolutely brilliant. And yeah, guys, like, share, subscribe to Eagle-Eyed Football. Got a live season review for Manchester United tomorrow. So that was going to be live. So if you want to come in and chuck in your comments, Dan, and throw some shade, you're more than welcome.
Shout scum from the background.
Guys, once again, like, share, subscribe, and we are done.